Our first reading today comes from Genesis 37, verses 29 through 36. Leading up to this story, Joseph, Jacob's favorite son, was despised by his brothers, thrown into a pit or a well by them, and then sold into slavery in Egypt without his eldest brother Reuben's knowledge. Now that the brothers have rid themselves of their beloved brother, they have to deal with the grief that ensues. Genesis says, when Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in it, he tore his clothes. He returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is no more. What will I do?" Then they took Joseph's tunic, killed a sacrificial goat, dipped the tunic in its blood, ordered the colorful tunic to be brought to their father, and they said, "We found this. Do you know whether it's your son's tunic or not?" He recognized it and said, "My son's tunic. A terrible animal must have devoured him and surely tore Joseph to pieces." Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned his son for many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "I will descend into my grave mourning for my son." So Joseph's father wept for him. Our second reading comes from John, chapter 11, verses 32 through 36. Mary and Martha called Jesus to come heal their brother and Jesus' good friend Lazarus, but Jesus did not come immediately, and Lazarus had died. When Jesus arrived, Martha expressed her faith in him and her belief that Lazarus would rise again on the last day. Then Martha sent Mary to speak to Jesus. According to John, when Mary came to where Jesus was, upon seeing him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Then, seeing her weeping and the Jews that accompanied her weeping, Jesus groaned inside and stirred himself up. And Jesus asked, "Where did you lay him?" They answered him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "Look how much Jesus loved him." This is the word of the Lord. This week, we continue our emotional sermon series with an emotion that isn't talked about enough: grief. We all feel grief, which the Oxford Dictionary defines as a deep sorrow, a trouble, or annoyance. We usually link grief to the loss of someone special, as Jacob felt over his son's death and Jesus felt over the death of his beloved friend and the state of the world. We usually avoid discussing our grief in order to make others and ourselves more comfortable. But we need to discuss it because it serves a very important function in our lives. And so grief deserves to be explored rather than pushed aside. Both of our readings today revealed the grief that comes from death, especially the death of someone close to the person who is grieving. Both texts refer to the tears that came from the sad knowledge that these people were no longer accessible, that they had gone on to be with God, that they were dead. In Christian and Jewish tradition, and in America in general, we don't talk often enough about this time of grief. Instead, we focus on the bright side, encouraging people to get over the death, to move on with life, and to rest comfortably in the knowledge that their loved one is now with God. Rather than discussing the value of the grieving process in helping us to use our memories of that beloved person to make the world a better place, we rush the process and focus on getting through all the stages and all the traditions surrounding death as quickly as possible, without giving ourselves the time to properly grieve, because we just want to get back to our normal lives. The thing is, grief is actually quite healing. If we buck tradition a little bit and truly embrace the memories, the feelings, and the traditions that tied us to the person that we lost. I've lost so many people over the course of my life, but two of them can help us to better understand grief and how it aids in the process of healing and moving on, teaching us how to embrace grief and many of the other emotions that come with the end of life. When I was only 5 years old, my mom's dad died. I didn't know him well, but I was sad. I was sad because I knew I would never know him. I was sad because I knew it was a somber occasion, and it was something that warranted grieving. But mostly, I was sad because everyone around me was laughing and joking, telling me that his pain was over, that he wouldn't suffer anymore, and that he was in a better place. As a young child, this hit wrong on so many levels. If he was in a better place, why didn't we get to go there and be with him too? If he wasn't experiencing pain anymore, where did it go? Is that why I was feeling so much pain? Why wasn't I allowed to talk about my pain with anyone in my family? What could I do to make it better? Was I just supposed to fake it till I made it? You see, like many people, my family understood grief as something that needed to be pushed away. It was unpleasant and messy, and nobody wanted to deal with the negative emotions associated with it. As a result, it took years for me to process that grief, come to terms with what I felt when I was struck by grief, and learn how to sit with grief in a way that ultimately brought about healing for me. My second story comes from when my dad's dad died in 2017. I was a little bit older. He'd suffered with dementia and medical issues for a number of years. For years, his wife insisted on caring for him until his children received medical power of attorney and got him into a facility where he could get the care that he needed. He remained there for a few years, long after he didn't know anyone anymore and didn't even know his own name. When the end approached, the family was called to say goodbye. I went with my parents and was the only grandchild present when he passed. But being there helped me to understand what it means to grieve properly. For about 3 days before he passed, we sat around telling stories about my grandfather. I learned more about him in those few days than I had in the entire rest of my life. I held his bony hand and witnessed him breathe his last breath with a little laugh, the only noise he made the entire time that I was there. None of us expected to cry when he passed. We had been grieving his life for years as he deteriorated, and then for days as we waited for the end. But when he took his last breath, we all started crying. Then he chuckled and breathed one more breath, and we cried some more. We all left shortly after that to have a meal together, to tell more stories, and to ensure all of the end-of-life plans were taken care of, eulogy written, funeral scheduled, body en route. We all grieved together for about a week, 3 days before his death and 3 days after, and When I went home, I continued to grieve for a few days. Even though his death was expected and we had been grieving to some extent for years, nobody tried to push me to get over it or just let it go. I was allowed to sit with the feelings and let the love that I could no longer offer him wash over me as tears streamed down my face. It was sad. But there was a sense of closure that came with allowing that deep sense of grief to envelop me for a few days as I sorted through the jumble of emotion and learned more about my grandfather than I could ever have imagined. Of course, even though I've used examples of death to explain the value of grief, this does not mean that death is the only thing we grieve. We grieve so many other things. When we lose a job or a relationship, and even when a friend moves away, we grieve that loss. We can even grieve the loss of things that we dreamed of that we now know are not possible. It may not be quite the same. We may not sit around and tell stories about someone as we watch them take their last breaths, but those things which we grieve, those things which affected our lives and are now gone, require some time to process and reflect on as well. When we read the text from John today, we understand that Jesus did this. He may have been mourning the life of Lazarus, even though he knew that he was about to restore that life. But surely he was also mourning so much more, the way the world worked and still works, along with the fact that all of these Jews gathered to mourn Lazarus were about to understand Jesus' power. And he was about to lose whatever sense of security and anonymity he might enjoy in the land, because it was time to reveal who he was on a new and different level. While everyone else was mourning Lazarus, it is quite possible that Jesus was mourning the role that he was being forced to take on. His inability to let things go and his imminent death, when all his suffering would be over and he would truly be in a better place, where he was going to prepare a place for each one of us. Jesus grieved well. He knew how to embrace the feelings that God graced him with. He mourned, but he did more than that. And we can learn some things about grief from the way that Jesus lived, especially when we remember that Jesus knew all along what his role in the world would entail. And we consider that he had reason to grieve throughout his entire life. Here are 7 things we can learn from Jesus' example. First, pay attention to your own needs and prioritize self-care. Whether you need to express emotion, crying like Jesus did as he grieved, or you need to take time to be alone like Jesus did on many occasions, or you need to surround yourself with others who are working towards a common goal, as Jesus was surrounded by his disciples. The important thing is that you are recognizing your needs while you are grieving and ensuring that they are met. Remember, you must take care of yourself in order to care for others. Second, prioritize rest and nutrition. Jesus was constantly eating and resting with crowds, with sinners, with his disciples. Wherever he went, you could trust that he would do those 2 things. While rest and nutrition are important throughout our lives, they are particularly important while we grieve, because grieving takes a toll on our bodies, making it harder to concentrate and easier to feel depleted and empty. We need rest and nutrition to restore us. Third, exercise, or at least move your body. Jesus did this by walking from town to town. He couldn't ride in a car, so he walked everywhere he went, getting the exercise he needed to restore his soul and lift his mood while dealing with the world that he constantly grieved, because the world is not as it was created to be. Fourth, seek emotional and social support. Jesus did this through prayer and through being part of a group as he led the disciples to do God's work in the world. We can do this by getting more involved in church or in a group that was important to a loved one who has left us, or by going out and forming new relationships that both help us remember the one we lost and help us to heal from the loss. We can and should also do this through prayer, knowing that God helps us to grieve well. Fifth, don't rush the process. Jesus grieved throughout his ministry. Lazarus' death may be the only place where it was obvious, but knowing the state of the world and understanding how disconnected the world was from what it ought to be surely caused a constant state of grief throughout his ministry. If Jesus could grieve his entire lifetime, you can grieve for however long you need to grieve. Don't let others convince you that your process is taking too long. It takes as long as it takes. 6, use tradition to aid in your healing. Jesus bucked tradition, picking grain and healing on the Sabbath and overthrowing tables in the temple. His healing required fixing what was wrong and forming new traditions. Sometimes this can be healing for us as well. Sometimes a change in tradition, embracing new and better ways of doing things, leads us to the healing that we need. And 7th, give your grief to God. Remember that God is the giver of life and can help us through everything that we face. Turn to God as you grieve, understanding that God grieves alongside you, hoping to relieve some of your distress as you become the person that grief helps you to become. In doing these things, in following Jesus' example, we are able to grieve well. And when we emerge from grief, we come out of it closer to God, healthier and more whole, because we take the time to draw closer to God and to one another.